Lucretia Mott and Betty Friedan were different in many ways, but similar in the most important. Lucretia lived in the 19th century from 1793 to 1880, and Betty lived in the 20th century from 1921 to 2006. Both were influential American reformers and feminists.
One large difference between Lucretia and Betty is outside of their work improving women's rights. Lucretia was a Quaker teacher, while Betty was a journalist. Lucretia became a teacher because she was inspired by her Quaker parents, who were teachers at the Society of Friends, who spoke about equality between men and women, particularly in work and education.
Betty became a journalist after seeing how unfairly women were treated, but more influential was her mother, who quit her job as a journalist to be a housewife and regretted it her whole life, always telling Betty to become a journalist.
They were both dissatisfied with how they were treated at their jobs. Lucretia quit teaching at Nines Partners School after seeing how much more men were being paid than women for doing the same work. Betty tried to combine her work as a journalist with being a housewife, but it didn't work because when she tried to go on maternity leave for a second time for her second child, they fired her. She filed a complaint, but it was ignored.
Both women helped with numerous organizations and conferences. Lucretia organized the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, the American Anti-Slavery Society, and the first United States Women's Rights Convention. Betty founded the National Association for Women, or NOW, the National Conference for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, or NARL, and the National Women's Political Caucus, NWPC.
Lucretia lectured about peace, anti-slavery, not drinking alcohol, women's equality, and labor rights, whereas Betty lectured completely about women's equality. Lucretia helped black slaves that were in hiding and fought for blacks and women's rights to vote, starting in 1913. By the time Betty was born in 1921, women had already been able to vote for almost a decade. Betty believed in equal job opportunities between men and women, and so did Lucretia.
Lucretia said, "We too often bind ourselves by authorities rather than by the truth." She defied authority and stood up for what she thought was right.
Betty said that too many high school girls act as though there's nothing more to life than getting a man, having children, and keeping a house, which represents one of the notions she stood for, women's futures.
Lucretia and Betty spoke at numerous events. Lucretia spoke at the Seneca Falls Convention, various women's rights conferences, and the Society of Friends. Betty spoke at most NOW, NARL, NWPC meetings, and on various TV programs.
Lucretia spoke out in public at conventions, whereas Betty wrote books as a way of expressing her views and ideas. Lucretia only wrote one book, Discourse on Women, while over the course of her lifetime, Betty wrote the books The Feminine Mystique, It Changed My Life, Writings on the Women's Movement, The Second Stage, and The Fountain of Age.
Lucretia didn't see the passing of the 19th Amendment, the women's right to vote, and Betty never got the Equal Rights Amendment passed. Neither woman lived to see their goal being achieved, but both women had a long-lasting impact on the world and women's equality.